What up, folks? Man, that was a good one today, baby. Will, we're about to have one of the most magical journeys in the world. Welcome to the show, my man. How are you doing today, brother?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. And we had an intro call that I thought was one of the coolest intro calls we've had because you did an amazing job of just being humble and being real. And these are my favorite conversations, man, to have, and I cannot wait to have it. But before we get there, obviously, I've had some issues in the last 3 to 4 days. People, Mikey G NFT has been hacked. I can't even tell you what I did. I don't know. I had two-factor authentication hooked up. But I'll tell you this, Elon, you got to get your shit together when it comes to hacked helped accounts. It is such a disaster, man. It is so bad. So anybody that watches this, please reach out to the Midlife Crisis Twitter account if you know a human being that works at X, because I need to get that Mikey G account back. I've worked my ass off for the last 5 years to build that presence. And it's a little heartbreaking, but you know what? I ain't going to give up. That's why I'm here. I've been doing this for 5 years, and I ain't going anywhere. With that also being said, we have tons of really cool guests coming up. Rec Tech, I'm talking to Gigaverse, we're talking to Duper, so a lot of just other some DeFi, not DeFi protocols. We just had Rebecca. Have you heard of Saga, by the way, Will?
I have not.
So they're an L1 that allows you to whip up an L1 quickly within their L1 ecosystem. It's the L1 of L1s.
L1 forks as a service.
Yes, that's exactly what it is, with a concentration on entertainment and gaming. But brilliant human being, fantastic conversation. They're totally worth talking to. You know, that's the one thing I loved about the duo is I get to talk to amazing people like yourself and link you up with other really cool founders. So she was just on. We are booked out for the next 3 to 4 weeks. So I'm super, super pumped about that. But that's enough about me. That is enough about me. We're going to get going here. And we're going to start off with the man, the myth, the legend, Will. So what we like to do here on Midlife Crisis, Mikey G Podcast, is we do just like a formal introduction. Now, when I was writing your tweet, man, I was like, damn, this guy is way smarter than I'll ever be in 10 lifetimes. So we start going through, and I didn't even know I knew it was a math award, but what you won in your university, what was it called again?
The Putnam exam. Yeah.
Putnam exam. So before I even do a foreign introduction, I just need to know what that is. Can you explain that to me? Because I've heard about it, but I really don't actually know what it is.
Yeah, so it's a test taken by undergraduate math students,
Okay.
mostly pure math students across US and Canada. And there's a lot of hype around it amongst mathletes, I guess, because the median score is 0. And it's just like 6-hour test with like 12 questions. And so, you know, if the median score is 0, like if you score anything, it's like really impressive. And so I scored a 19, and it was like the highest my university had seen from anyone who had ever taken it there.
Nailed it. I love it. And I knew what it was, but that's amazing. Yeah, listen, I took AP Calculus and I skipped AP Calculus. Well, I skipped Calculus 1, but then, I mean, it's not even math. You know what stonewalled me in college? Organic chemistry. When I saw OChem, I was like, I am out. I'm going to get a graphic design degree, and I'm just leave it at that. That's what I'm going to do. I don't give a shit because that is not fun. So, Will earned an excellence award from the Department of Mathematics for the highest score ever in the Putnam exam, which we just talked about. Self-taught software engineer writing trading bots on GDAX. Don't exactly know what that stands for.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a OG thing because it's Coinbase, but back in the day, their advanced trade was called GDAX.
Gotcha. I mean, I know a lot about crypto and Web3, but GDAX threw me off. That's an OG of OG, so I don't feel too horrible about that. 4 years as a software engineer on scalability team. And how do you pronounce this? At Xander? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, it was like they rebranded when I was working there, and I guess they were owned by AT&T at the time, so it was a tip of their hat to Alexander Bell.
Oh, gotcha.
Xander is short for Alexander.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense, but acquired by Microsoft in 2022. In addition, this is one of the most exciting parts about the podcast. I get you give you a little peel back the layer of who Will is. This dude, backcountry snowboarder, has intentionally started 2 avalanches himself. I'm assuming to snowboard down these things. And he loves, favorites place to snowboard, Jackson Hole. Did I get your introduction right? Anything you want to add on, my man?
No, I think that was great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Absolutely, dude. I'm super pumped to have the conversation. And it's this quickly we are here. Will, how did you get to the seat you're sitting in today? Please give me episode 1, 2, and 3. To reiterate for the audience that'll listen to this podcast later, episode 1 is your childhood, man. And I'm really interested here in vivid memories, parental figures, or just influences about just rules you abided by that help really mold the mindset that you have today. 2, professional schooling career. I'm really interested in wins, losses, skill sets gained, mentorship, leadership, all of these like kind of life principles that you're starting to gain, and especially skill sets as well in this period of life, which ultimately culminates in Web3, right? And how you were prepped for Web3, what excited you about Web3, what you're currently doing now, and what a little bit of the future looks like. Cannot wait to hear it, my man. Let's have at it on episode 1.
Yeah. So episode 1, where to start? You know, I was raised by my mom. You know, she was like a single parent. My dad just struggled with mental health, drug addiction, alcoholism, just kind of like a mix of things, and was pretty much absent from my life. Most of it from a very early age. And so, you know, my mom was like a big, I think, figure in my life. But I also think that, you know, some of the things growing up with like a single parent who's trying to pay the bills and raise you, you know, I think I spent a lot of time by myself.
Okay.
And I think there's good and bad that came from that. I really was like, could like play with Legos or, you know, different toys, like, and build things for like hours. Like I could just disappear into like this imaginary world that I created through, you know, those different things. And, but it also was like super, I think, lonely. Just that situation of, you know, having a lot of time by myself. And yeah, I think that, I was pretty awkward, around people, just like I think is pretty natural middle school. You know, just feeling of, not fitting in. Not feeling like belonging. And there's just a day where some of my friends, like, you know, just like any other day, said, hey, you know, you want to go, after school, you want to go like smoke some weed. And it was like, they could have said anything. And there was this part of me that just was like, just wanted to belong, right? Just be a part of, like, what are we doing, you know? And, so I think in middle school, I you know, started smoking weed, and that was, you know, pretty, you know, benign. You know, you go get high, watch a movie, laugh your, you know, ass off. And then
tons of fun at the time.
Yeah. And then I think really like kind of a life-changing experience for me was that when I found alcohol, I remember the first night like really vividly. It was like sort of like a spiritual experience.
Right.
For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe and just be myself. And
Oh, interesting. Interesting insight there. Okay, tell me about this because I actually have a lot of similarities. And you
yeah,
think it was just the feeling of, like, being able to be loosen up, right?
yeah. I mean, I just think the awkwardness of social awkwardness, feeling uncomfortable in social situations,
Uh-huh.
just not feeling really comfortable in my own skin, like
Right, right.
most of my youth, it
Uh-huh.
just like vanished. Like I
Right.
just in a minute it was gone. And it was like something that I got immediately in trouble. I remember that night the cops showed up, and I remember everyone running away. And I remember just like not being able to run, like seeing all of them do it. And then
Yeah.
me, like, I'm like, I can't run straight. I'm
This
in
is
this driveway. I don't know how I got in this driveway. I stumbled through a bush. And then like, the cops like are circling the corner. I just like jump back in the bush, and
Yeah.
they went by. I was like, oh, I'm safe. So I like went out of the bush the other way, and another cop showed up, and I just like saw him get out of his cop car, and like the only thing that I could think to do is I just sat down. It was just like I just waved the surrender flag. I just was like done, because I had gotten so inebriated by this point. Just as a young 14-year-old that
Right,
didn't have
right,
any weight to him at all. Um, and I remember sitting back in the back of the cop car, and I had this thing happen to me where I just was like, I cannot wait to do this again.
right, right. Dude, and I mean, listen, it's funny, but it's not funny because I know that was the beginning of like a long journey for me too, and I want your feedback on this. I mean, we're kind of jumping to this, but I think it's a fascinating topic. And I think people need to hear this because what resonated with me right away, man, I felt the same way, right? Like my family had always suffered from alcohol abuse, and it was when I was little, I had the perfect childhood, right? And my dad, similar, clinically depressed, like not major depressed, but like depressed throughout his whole life. My mom was a Rayolite, but she was kind of like the ugly duckling of her. Like all my other aunts and uncles are doctors and lawyers. Mom dropped out of high school. Like she just went her own route, right? But just the most kind, loving soul ever. But when I got introduced, like I was that guy that would like had the cool mom that was like, "Hey, we're gonna get you some libations, and as long as you stay at the house, it's gonna be cool because I don't want you doing that anywhere else, right?" And it's same thing for me, man. Like when I had it, I felt like it was like my real self, right?
Mhm.
And what I think is unfortunate for me, and I would love your reflection now looking back, is I was too young to understand that it really was the substance making me that way, and it wasn't me, because I am so far leaps and boves above what I was at that moment in time. It brought out the best in me. Unfortunately, I'm not an angry human being, so I never got like aggressive or was an a-hole or anything. But I didn't realize that I had a problem because I just associated my best self with when I was drinking, and that's not good,
Right.
right? But at the
Right.
time, you're like, "That's great." Any reflections on that? Does that relate? Can you relate to that or
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was something that was sort of like a freedom or this like sort of version of myself that I thought
Mhm,
was like better enhanced, right? All the
mhm.
sort of baggage went away. I could sort of,
Right,
and I think at the end of the day, part of it too was just like part of me, and I think part of my journey has been just like from a very young age, like searching for meaning and
mm,
searching for a reason. And like,
mm,
unfortunately, I confuse that with alcohol, right? And
right,
drugs, where
right.
I found meaning and purpose,
Yep,
and it
yep.
was just so misguided. But
Mhm.
it felt so on point. And I was like, you know, for a period of my life, I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is it. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I relate with that too. See, what's different about you is you actually, I think, probably was even more aware than I was of, like, you were searching for meaning. I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but I was doing, right? Like, inherently. Another thing that you said that I think is really interesting though is you went through this time where your mom was working, you were alone a lot, and yeah, it let you go on to the bad parts of, like, trying some things that, you probably shouldn't have at the youngest age that you were, but you did talk about play,
Yeah.
talking about Legos. And let's get to the little more positive things on the flip side of this, which is I would love your perspective because this comes up all the time too with founders is this concept of exploration and creativity. Talk to me about that and the impact that you think or advice that you would give to younger people just about this topic in general, because I think it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, I mean, I have a kid now, and I just see how the power of play in general, like how it
Mhm,
just like lights up their
mhm,
entire sensory system,
mhm,
you know, when they can play with another kid their age or, you know, whatever it is. And
mhm,
for me, I would go into my own universe and start building, you know, whatever it was, Connects, Legos. I had a wooden train set. I remember like one of my like great accomplishments was taking like 3 or 4 different wooden train sets and putting them all together and using every single piece. And it was
Yes.
like this thing of like I just kept tweaking it until like every piece was somewhere, and it
Yeah.
all was like this perfect system. And it was
Yes.
like I could spend, you know, just countless hours and just disappear into those worlds.
Right. Right. And there's something said for this comes up a lot too. I think to be at a high level of when it comes to business acumen and being an entrepreneur and a founder, creativity is such a critical role. And a lot of the people that come on this show, because of things like you did, play, and I'd love to hear if there was anything else that you did, but what you were really doing good, and you actually read this a lot in like studies, people that read, and it's good to do it at the young age, that are really good at like visualizing what they're reading. That visualization exercise, and you might not be good at it good, but getting good at that is so good for creativity because guess what? And you can attest to this. Every day as an entrepreneur, you have to creative problem solve
Yeah.
because you don't have the resources that you need, and you need to figure out how to get something done in a creative way. Do you agree with that? Anything to expand upon on that concept?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the where my head goes to is sort of the next iteration of kind of for me was math. And
Mm,
I always think that math gets this like bad rap for being like very like I uncreative
yeah.
or just sort of. But I think the problem solving specifically in math and what I loved about it is that you could get to from A to B in like 10 different ways. Of course, B
Mm,
was like the right place and there's like a right answer, but there's not necessarily like one way to think about it. And I really loved that because it was like the extension of the Legos, right? But in my head, it was like
yes.
a whole nother block and things to sort of put together. And I, you know, the other fond memory I have of like sort of high school, and you know, I spent a lot of time fucking off and getting into trouble, but I,
Right.
you know, also just like would go and sit at, you know, coffee shops and smoke cigarettes and, you know, play chess. Like, and I remember this chess player that I played with a lot, and he sort of took me under his wing and like mentored me. He was like a barista. He traveled the world playing chess, but like lived in a van, right? Like he slept and lived in a van. He's
Yeah.
just had one of these people that did not choose a traditional path,
Yeah.
right? But made it work.
Mhm.
And he was a brilliant chess player, and he also taught me this game called Go that I also am very fond of. But the aesthetics, I think, of math and analytics sometimes are lost.
Mhm.
And for me, he sort of brought that to life for me because he explained that, like in chess,
Yeah.
that there's for him there's this aesthetic of chess that you would try to win the game, but you would try to do it with as many pieces as possible. So
Interesting.
he'd get me like my king in the middle of the board, and I'd like be blocked on like two sides or three sides by like my pieces. And then he'd have like three pieces of his. And it was like this elaborate sort of construction.
Right.
And whether that makes sense or not to you, I think for me, what that woke up was this idea that like the math and all these things were like directly correlated to aesthetics and to
Oh, yeah.
creativity.
Yeah.
And from that point on, I always sort of looked for that in everything I was doing.
Yeah, yeah, dude. I'm not gonna lie, that just kind of like gave me chills because one of the things I love about what we do here is you just gave me just yet a new perspective, and I've never heard somebody, because I totally get what you're saying, but I've never heard somebody link up aesthetics and math the way you did. And also, I think this is a message that everybody should hear too. Is I think most people interpret math as pretty black and white. There's a right and wrong answer. But for
Yeah.
you, beautifully said, right, is yeah, you're trying to get to B, but you can get there in 25 different ways. That is a creative and even an amazing thing because you even go to theories and what we are quote unquote have as truths, you sometimes, and I'm sure will happen in the future, use math to debunk what are technically truths, right? And
Right.
that is all a creative process and different ways of analyzing things. So there's so much to unpack there with math. And I cannot wait to get down that journey. I think that's where we go next. I do want to give you the space uh, to talk anything else about impactful. I already think you did an amazing that dude. We're almost a half hour in, believe it or not. Like this is how exciting it is. That's just I'm fascinated by what you're telling me already. We can get to the math part if unless there's something else that sparks the mind. That's cool.
Well, I think just to like maybe, play the tape completely through. I
Yeah,
did struggle with drugs and alcohol for immensely through my teenage years.
yeah.
I was in rehab by the age of 16
Wow.
after basically having a contentious relationship with my mom where, like she would kick me out, I'd run away,
Right.
like,
Right.
I was couch surfing, just doing like whatever I could do to like just chase my addiction. And, got to just like a darker and darker place. And I
Mhm.
think they're really like the thing that sort of blows me away about my own stories, I was pretty much like assigned to like sort of uh, live a life of that for the rest of my life and expire
Right.
that way. And
Right.
it really wasn't like there wasn't anything to life except for that.
Mm.
And the really strange thing that happened is I started taking a lot of mushrooms. Which was also in itself another spiritual experience.
Right. Oh,
I
yeah.
think at the age of 15, I was actually in a calculus class, tripping for the first time and watching the math equations on the board solve themselves.
Yeah. Oh,
While the trees outside were like growing into the windows into the class. I mean, it was like that was like my like spiritual experience with like mushrooms.
they
But
do some things to you.
yeah, and but I got really obsessed with them, and the interesting thing that happened is every time I started coming down, I started having these realizations about my life that I couldn't sort of ignore. Some like truth started hitting me really fast and really hard, and some of them were like these things like where I had surrounded myself by like really dark people in dark places, and I had these loving people in my life that I had basically kicked in the teeth and treated like shit.
Mhm.
And I was surrounded by it was like mutual abusery were the people that I was around. like
Mm,
everyone was just there, just using each other. And coming off of a trip of mushrooms, I was like, that's fucked up. And this is
right.
getting really dark. And it only keeps getting worse. That was just my experience. It was like every day is the worst day of your life kind of thing. It just
Yep.
keeps getting darker and darker.
Yep.
And it terrified me because I I knew I needed to do something and I knew I wasn't ready. And I was like,
Mm,
how bad does this have to get?
right.
How
Right.
dark does this have to get before I'm willing to do something? It was like one of the most terrifying thoughts of my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a week later, I tripped again and had like a similar experience and basically like knew that I had to get help and I had to get sober. And I haven't had a drink or done any drugs since that night.
That's
And I
amazing.
was that was October um October 20th of 2005.
Dude, congratulations. And so here's I'm interested in this of just advice reflecting back to people that are struggling with this, man. This is a huge thing, especially this day and age when anxiety, depression, all of these things that we've crafted with this just society that we built with tech and social media and all these things. Because the one thing I cannot relate to is when I look back at my situation, mine culminated in a major depressive order, which at that point, I have I have no control over my mind, right? And that's just a whole totally different experience. Like I was when you get to the point I was, there is medicine I am firmly convinced is the only thing that can fix it. Your chemicals in your brain are just at that point so far effed.
Yeah.
Your brain ain't working right, right? And so but before that, when I had, the control over my mind, I didn't realize I was so severely, like, depressed still that I was just numbness, that I was really good at, like, bottling things deep down inside, right? And so, I never came to that realization. So my question to you is, do you think it's just because I don't I this is my opinion. I don't think you can will yourself to come to that decision that you just need to change. I think it's almost like you said, an out of body experience due to a substance. It came to this realization.
Yeah.
Have to have some type of thing drastically happen so quickly in a moment of time that makes you just snap into it. What are your thoughts there, man?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was tricked into it in a way. Like it was sort of
Mm,
like the carpet got pulled on me or the rug got pulled on me. And like uh for me, I think that like the thing that I came to realize through a lot of help
yeah.
and figuring out how to get help was that for me the problem really centered with me being like really just a selfish and self-obsessed person
Ooh.
and that sort of was the root of it and
Mhm.
that the drinking and the drug addiction was the symptom, right?
Right, right,
Because when I stopped drinking it wasn't just like, oh, everything's better now,
right.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Now it's a question of like, I mean, I went through all of college sober and that was brutal in some ways, right?
Oh,
It's like, what
what
do
do you
you
do?
do in college,
Right.
right? Like, what does everyone do?
Yes.
And there was periods in high school after I went to rehab where I was sober, and I was like, I don't know what's worth on this earth than having to go through high school sober. Like
Right.
that is like a special place in hell.
Yes.
For
Yes.
me at least, and maybe other people aren't like
I think
that.
I think no, I think there's a lot of people that agree with that. You're not one of the few, for sure.
And so I think that, the thing that I had to figure out how to do was like how to live in my own skin
Yeah,
without, relying on drugs and alcohol.
dude.
And a lot of that for me was figuring out how to be, think about myself less, which I'm still really bad at, right? It can
Yeah,
still be it's like a lifelong challenge to
right.
do that well.
Yeah. And you said it where I ultimately got to, and I think this is my version of this was, hey man, I am blaming everyone else but myself. And I don't think it manifested in selfishness in a way, but more just of I was really good at again deterring everything away or making excuses that it wasn't me, right? But what I'm getting at is what you just said is what how I interpret is self-realization, man. The realization of the self and who you are as a human being and how to balance that. And to your point that you said, it's a lifelong struggle. That is, I think, the fundamental piece of anybody that's struggling through this stuff. Until you come to the conclusion that it is you and that you need to work on you, it's very difficult to even start. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in general, just having watched other people struggle with these same things, like until people want to change, it's almost impossible,
Right.
right? I mean, it's
Right.
why it's so tricky. I think, this topic of the effects of, some of the drugs across our, country or,
Yeah.
across the world, maybe, but definitely I know more about in the US is like
Mhm.
these people just until they want to change, it's almost impossible to
Oh,
like to try to motivate somebody to like act differently.
yeah.
And
I totally agree.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm saying my form of that, I think, is just the self-realization is a form of that, right? And it is how do you get somebody to have an honest conversation with themselves? Because 'Cause I've said this many times on the show. You had, like, this very vivid, um, almost out of body experience. I did it as a way too, but mine manifested in, like, the typical, like, what you would imagine a Hollywood film was. It's like you're looking in the mirror, like, the music's playing in the background, and I'm like, "Shit, dude,
Yeah.
it's me." And, like, that was probably the toughest moment of my life. And, uh, but how do you get somebody to get there, you know? It's tough, man. But, dude, thank you so much for sharing that. Like,
Yeah.
it takes so much courage and strength to even do that. Like I said, man, we've gotten super close and we've only been a little over a half hour. I'm very, very excited about the rest. Let's get into the let's get into the creativity and math conversation because I think this is going to be a theme throughout the rest of our conversation. What I'm interested here is thank the Lord that you are here because I know you're a brilliant mind. You're building something awesome. So we got through that really awesome insights. Tell me just about that impact of when you decided, was it that chess game that you were like, this is it, man? I think it's cool that there's creativity and math. It's expanding my mind. I'm super interested in it. Or did that come over time as you started going to college? What did that look like for you?
I think it took a long time. I think
Mhm,
even through college, I felt pretty lost with like what I was going to do.
mhm.
Um, I had taken a lot of math classes in high school and basically had like a minor in mathematics in like my freshman, sophomore year of college. And there's just this point where I was like sitting across from an advisor being like, what are you going to graduate in?
Mhm.
And it was like, well, it seems like math is the easiest way out, right? So it's like that was like quite honestly, like it wasn't necessarily by like, brute force or will. It was just like sort of, this seems like the easy way. and
Right,
and
right.
because I for my math acumen, I have some deficiencies in other like language. I can't spell like like these things are like not
Yeah,
things that come naturally to me. So it's like I'd go into a class and read the syllabus. Sometimes I would sign up for like twice the amount of credits that I needed to take and then sort
yeah,
of whittle down the ones that I wasn't going to do. And like if there was a 10-page paper or more, I was just like dropping the class. Like I can't write a 10-page paper. Like
ain't
that is
happening.
insane.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I ended up with a math degree.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, but I was like really good at it. It just came naturally to me. It didn't take much effort, and oftentimes I sort of got away with sort of, you know, just showing up to like the final and just like taking the test, even though I hadn't gone to class like for, you know, the entire semester. And I actually asked for a letter of recommendation from one of my teachers when I was thinking about going to grad school, and, you know, was like, you know, her response was like, yeah, I always knew you were bright because you never showed up to class or paid attention, and then you just like aced the final. And I like just went and read the book like the week before the final. I just read the math book and then just took the final.
You understood it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you brought this up, because fascinating topic. We talk a lot about this on the show. What is your thought about this? This in your inherent knack for mathematics versus working hard at it. Like, there's many opinions on kind of where greatness comes from, inherent innate abilities. Do you think that was just always part of your being? Did you think it may started manifesting because you were playing and building those trains from an early age? What are your thoughts about that in general?
I don't know if it was like one thing. I mean, obviously, I you know, sometimes capacity is a blocker, right? Like some people don't have the sort of capacity of understanding, and
Yeah.
or they have a different capacity, right? And their strengths are somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think there's a combination. I mean, the other thread of my childhood is I love punk rock. I remember going to, and I think this is important to what you're asking. Like, I remember going to a punk rock show and like Pennywise was playing and they shot out stickers, and I picked one up and it was like "fuck authority," and I was like, I have found my people, right? Like this is where I'm supposed to be.
Right.
And like I think that there's also this part of like rebellion and refusing to sort of like just stay in line and conform to the status quo, that is also a really important part of like both creativity, you know, mathematics, you know, business, and founding a company. I don't think that I could even sort of take the ups and downs if I didn't have this sort of like just deep inherent like need to change things and break things and redefine things.
Yep. Yeah, no, and I think, yes, that's fantastic insight. And I think I lost my thought. I told you I messed this podcast up. I had a really good thought. It'll come back to me.
This has been great.
This
has been great.
Thanks, man. I mean, I think it's this is what I was saying. You did. So I agree with you. It's combinations of the two, right? Because I do think there are just like, for instance, my mom, amazing human being, horrific with numbers, just can't put two and two together when it comes to that. And I do think she could work really, really hard at it and be like somewhat proficient. But is she ever going to be a math whiz genius? That she's just not cut out for that, right? But on the other side, she can light up a room with just walking into a room and a simple smile, right? Like she has that power, which a lot of people don't. And she is creative and like amazing creative writer, right? Because she's really good with creative and visualization too. So I totally agree with you. And I do think there is a lot of people that come back, and I'm glad that you did say it, is like, I think there's just some blockers mentally for people. So I thought your take was interesting because it is some things that I've heard. Moving forward, you get through college, you're still tinkering with the math idea. This is always too interesting to me, is you took, in essence, the easy way out, but you were often obviously gifted in this way of thinking. Take me through that kind of next phase when you're trying to figure it out, because I think this is yet another fork in the road where you're trying to have another aha moment, right? Like, and some people, I hear this a lot, and I love your thoughts on this too. Timing and luck is a huge part of life. And any entrepreneur that comes on this show and told me it was just pure blood, sweat, and tears, I'm going to call bullshit on them, right? Like timing and luck is part of it. So is that how this next phase of your journey manifested? Or did you start working on like math is the thing, I need to figure this out?
I actually wanted to go and like pursue a PhD in mathematics.
Mhm.
But I was rejected by academia. Even after that, I actually did this like summer program in Italy. There was like a summer graduate program, and
Yeah.
took some graduate classes trying to like sort of improve my resume, if you will, to like try to apply to like different higher level of education programs. And
Mhm.
I just at this point, I think there was a maturity. I think there was sort of this lacking of like deep driven passion of
Yeah.
like, this is what I want to do and I want to put all my energy into it. I didn't have that drive, and I just sort of wanted to do something, but didn't. I mean, I hate saying this sometimes because it can be arrogant, but like I never really had to try. There's a period all
That's
throughout my
totally fine, man.
education that
Yeah.
like I thought I was actually kind of dumb because I didn't try that hard. Like I just didn't do well in school.
Yeah.
But I was just like not motivated and not driven. I didn't have a reason to care. And I sort of never found that. And I sort of had been used to things coming naturally enough that I could get by,
Yeah.
that I never really had to work hard.
Yeah.
And so when I finally got challenged, I I buckled,
Mm.
and I surrendered to imposter syndrome. I
Mm.
surrendered to that voice in my head that said you're not good enough, and
Mhm.
um I just kind of tapped out. I remember my advisor sending me an email after that program and asking like, how did it go? Yada yada. And I was like, I wrote her email back. I feel so bad for this now, but I was like, I had an existential crisis, and I decided I'm not going to study math anymore. And that was like it. I mean, I feel like the journey from there to like Web3 and where I am today was years to recover from, of just that like believing that idea that I like didn't have what it took
Yes.
to be like good enough.
Dude, thank you for sharing that because this is the I actually had a roommate, I went to Penn State, and he was the same type of guy. Like, dude, this chemical engineering was one of the hardest majors you could pick at Penn State, and it was an engineering school, right? This shit was no joke. Never saw this dude open a book once. He was my DD to get hammered at every party, and he was on every board and activity thing that existed at the university, and the dude got a 4.0. I'm like, "How in the flying hell did he do that?" Same for me, I wasn't at that level in college, but, like, all through kinda high school, middle school, same thing. I didn't have to try hard, and I think this is a message to for people that have their britches are a little big or think they're smarter or just felt like they haven't been applied because it's easy. There is something out there in life that was gonna put you on your ass.
Right.
Because there are very smart people and things that you think you're good at, that's gonna hit you from a different way. My experience of when I did get hit in the face is my solution was, 1, obviously, you gotta start by day, but slowly over time, I actually got excited about the fact that I'm never gonna know everything, and I'm this constant pursuit of learning. So what is your thought about this principle and concept in general and how you deal with this, like, imposter syndrome and that kind of that phase that you went through?
I mean, for me, I feel like it was almost as in the long run, it was almost as devastating as drugs and alcoholism. And
Wow,
eventually, it got to the point where I just couldn't live that way anymore.
right?
And so the long and short of it is I actually got a job. I had a job like measuring roofs in college for roofing companies.
Yeah.
And I like, it was this job where like a bunch of people are working in it. That this is like the best they can do. And I don't mean that like in a mean
No,
way, but
I
like
know
they
you
just, they didn't, and it was really obvious that like I was sort of misplaced, but
Yeah.
it was very easy, in the sense that there was not any challenging math or anything like that. But it was very hard in the sense that like the hours were brutal, the demands were high. It was my penance, I feel like, for sort of not knowing how to apply myself. It's like, here's this thing that you can't get away with being smart. You just have to do the work. And at the end of it, funny story, as with these three guys that ran this company I was working for, we were at this trade show in Vegas. And I was telling this sales guy that we buy materials from the story about like the stuff I was studying in college and, just whatever. And he goes, he turns to me and he goes, "What the fuck are you doing in roofing?" And the three guys that ran the company that I work for all like were in separate conversations, but chimed in all at the same time, looked over and were like, "Shh."
So you were the water cooler talk of the company. Why is this guy here?
Yeah. And it was like everyone knew except for me, right? That like I didn't belong there.
Hmm.
And I actually went on a backpacking trip on my 30th birthday with my wife and out in Desolation Wilderness out in California near Tahoe
Nice.
area.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember like leaving, take some time off from work. And I remember getting back out and like driving to go grab some food after the trip and having this like panic attack where I was like, I can't drive. I can't be around people. I can't, and a lot of it I attributed back to this thing of like I just couldn't live this lie anymore, that like this was what I was supposed to be doing. And
Yeah.
that was sort of like the beginning of the end of me, working in that career. And so shortly after, the saving grace for me was that I discovered Bitcoin and I fucking fell in love. It was like the most interesting thing I had ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
And that like became the sort of seed that was planted that I just started putting more and more energy into pursuing.
Yep. Yep. So you said two critical things that I think are really important for people to just reiterate, to hear this message, to hear it all the time on the podcast. One, you have had multiple self-realization moments over this journey, right? At a young age with this mathematics and then just this clarity of like on your trip, right? So I think people get stuck in their mind that like I have to make the change. But a lot of times if your mindset's right, there are external factors like your buddy looking at you at work and saying, "What the F, dude, are you doing with your life?"
Right.
that puts you over that ledge. And so it goes back to this thing of like, I really am a huge advocate of just putting yourself out there, trying new things, exposing yourself to experiences, because those it factors that you cannot control can help put you over that edge, right? What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the mantras that I live by is you just show up even if you have nothing to show for it, right?
Yeah,
Like you just show up and you keep showing up and you just I don't know where I learned that, but I think that was one of the things that even in college that I didn't have that skill set. I
yeah,
didn't really understand the importance
yeah,
of that. It's like you show up on the bad day, you show up on a good day, you just show up and you're just present and
right.
you keep doing that. And I think that's 80-90% of most things is like showing up and doing the energy, putting the
100%.
energy in.
100%. And I love that you say this because I get asked all the time, Mikey, you've talked to all these founders. What is the number one key to success? It's that, hands down. I by far the largest percentage of keys of advice is consistent work over a long period of time. It is just hands down is showing up every day. And that is showing up when you don't want to do a damn thing. And that's okay that that day you only do one thing, but you at least showed up and got something done, right? But the difference and the hard part about this ecosystem and time we live in is long period. And my definition is 5 years minimum, 10 years most likely, and more than 10 years to be really good, right? And that is, you're like, when you hear long time this day and age, you think a year, right?
Right.
And people don't understand this concept. They just don't, right? Like I've been technically streaming for 5 years, really kind of founder podcasting for 3 years. I have barely even gotten started, man. And that it's just so lost on people. So thank you for bringing that up because I think that is a huge point. 2, I'm really interested in your opinion on this. You found Bitcoin, and I heard the word passion. And I am fascinated by this topic of passion because I am firmly convinced you have to have passion to keep yourself through the nitty-gritty and the hard times. So talk to me a little bit about finding that Bitcoin, but also you're just interested in the concept of passion in general to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was something that was really lost. There were periods where I'd have it, and I think one of the problems that I have with like education in general is that the education system I think was largely just lost on me. There were these moments where these certain projects were given to me throughout my life that I would be like go all in on them, and I would just do like kind of like blow people away. They're like, "What is this dude? He's like kind of a slacker. Like what?" Where did this come from, right? And there were always these moments where I was like interested and engaged, right?
Yeah.
And most of school and education I was like not interested and engaged. And so Bitcoin, there's a few things that I did in college, some like side projects, not like the main curriculum, but like writing paper and doing research. I love doing research and was doing that in college, like as an undergraduate, and getting really passionate at it and doing some interesting things with it. And yeah, Bitcoin for me it had this just killer combination of cryptography, which I was really interested in to start with, like, and had been like studying it because it had a lot of number theory and all these things that I found really amazing and really loved, and finance and game theory. And like that sort of like all bundled into one was just like, I'm not sure if there's anything more interesting. I mean, some people might say AI. I find AI incredibly boring. It's like this sort of like, hey, let's not think and have robots think for us.
Right.
Like I just don't see the value in that unless you're trying to figure out how to like lead sheep to slaughter. But like, for crypto, the sort of revolutionary aspect of it, the rebuilding the system, it just spoke to like everything in me and my values.
Yep. And that is a critical moment in your life, and that's so cool that you found that because I found that with this, right? I was like, holy shit, I love this. And I'm pretty good at it. And like, this is like now something that I can utilize because I have a day job, right? I'm not blindly just quitting all of my things because I think I'm going to make it. I'm maybe not the top, like burn the ships type guy. I'm practical about things. I have a kid, I have a mortgage, I have all these things, right? But at the same time, this passion and this love, it gives me a whole different perspective on life. So let's go that way, man. You find Bitcoin, you're super jazzed. Unless there's anything in your professional career that you want to talk about before we get into Web3, I do want to be cognizant of time. We are about an hour you're in and, want to give us at least half hour to talk about this if you're cool with that.
Yeah, for sure. I
So,
mean,
yeah.
I didn't get Web3 immediately. I sort of took a detour. I think that I was sort of trying to find my way into the community in Web3 around Denver. I was going to meetups back in like
Yep.
2017. And I had met some people and talked to some people about like how to get into the industry. And it just felt like everyone was like, well, are you a dev? Like, can you write code?
Yes.
And I was like, it's really hard to explain like this resume that I have in construction and being like, no, I'm actually like really,
I'm a roofer, guys. Leave me alone.
like, yeah. And it was this awkward time. And I was like, I literally like I just got like 3 0% interest credit cards, quit my job and was like, I'm going to learn to code.
Wow.
And God love my wife. She just was like, okay, she just like signed off on it. And
my wife would not do that. My wife would be like, you're out of your mind. Figure something else out.
Yeah. And so I learned code, and I learned to code actually writing a market maker bot on GDEX. That was like sort of how I learned. It was something I had been doing. I had started the code and just sort of trying to learn. And I was like, I'm just quitting my job. I'm going this direction. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going all in on it.
Yeah.
And so I took a detour getting a job. I mean, it was just like sort of going from, 0% interest cards, like credit cards running, paying the bills. So like I need a job. And so, I went and got a job as an engineer, just with teaching myself, over that period of time, 3 or 4 months that I was unemployed.
Yeah.
And, worked in that career for a while, was terrified again that imposter syndrome came back. I was like, what am I doing here? I can't believe these idiots hired me. And eventually it was just like, it came really natural. There was a switch at some point where I just realized that I was really good at it. And it just was easy again. And then eventually I got bored. And I think that's when DeFi summer happened. The two happened like kind of at the same time, where I'd hit this point where I was like, I could keep doing this. I don't really care about what we're doing or what we're building, but I like the problem solving of it. And then DeFi summer happened. And I was just like, I was watching it. I wasn't quite all the way engaged, but I was watching what was happening, being like, something is going on here and it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And eventually started doing like deep dives and getting really nerdy about it and reading code and all those different things and reading papers that's sort of like gigabrains are writing. And eventually like I read a paper and I was like, what if we did this differently? And what if we could put this together with that? And, that was really the early, seed of Ammalgam.
That's awesome, man. And so what I'm actually interested in the fact that DeFi summer really fascinated you because you're in this engineering background, you're picked up coding, you always have had this math, you liked Bitcoin because of the finance side, but what was it about DeFi? Was it just the eyeballs that it was getting, or what kind of why did you go down the rabbit hole is my question.
Yeah, I mean, like having really been passionate about Bitcoin and back in, I think it was 2015 when I started buying Bitcoin, I didn't use it much, right? It sat on an exchange. There was only a handful of occasions where I took it off exchange, and then it was just like, now it just sits in this wallet. And so I remember Ethereum, going to Ethereum meetups in 2017, but I just didn't get the smart contract thing. Like, I feel like the description is just terrible and like we should call them something else. But it was like, I don't get a smart contract. Like, why are lawyers involved in this? Like, it just didn't click.
Right.
And then DeFi summer, when I saw the application take off of like the smart contracts, I was like, holy shit. Like, all of a sudden I was like motivated to take money off exchanges and like not, just sit in a centralized exchange and go like play right? And go see what things did and go explore and go listen to, podcasts of people explaining. I mean, I remember one of the early influences for me was I remember DeFi Dad and him doing a tutorial on like how approvals work and how you shouldn't use infinite approvals and like, being like, oh, okay, like I gotta, just figuring out the nuances of it. And
Yeah.
it was just a really cool time and
Yeah.
people were excited.
And so from that really magical moment, because mine was kind of in the NFT space because I'm a brand marketing guy, right? I came in and the aha moment for me was like, holy shit, this is fundamentally going to change the way brands can build with community. Like that was fascinating to me, right? This
Yeah.
was your holy shit moment. So I can talk very specifically about how I saw the evolution of this idea, which by the way, my theory and thesis was right, and it's still being built out to this day. People have done good and horrific jobs at it. And I think no one's even close to cracking the code, or if ever will, when it comes to building brand and community effectively. Uh, what is your kind of theory and takeaway about that exciting moment to where you are now from a DeFi lens and perspective? Would love to hear that.
Well, there was such creativity going on during that
Mhm,
period of time. I
mhm,
mean, it was like all these things that I think now are just like things that we accept in DeFi were all getting created. No one knew what they were, right? They're
right,
like, oh, rebate, like we created this rebase token and it like grows the supply. And everyone's like, what's a rebase token? And figure like people are just making up these new ideas. And for me, like I feel like math and all those things that I was interested in is sort of like dead unless you have something to apply it to
yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah,
And so that was like the piece of like DeFi summer is that people were being creative and making these creative new things. And it was just that creativity and that environment of like everyone one upping each other and also the speed at which open source develops,
oh
right?
yeah,
It's like, oh, Uniswap did this. What if we do that with a token? What if we make the token a rebasing token? What if we, like, and it just keeps going. And some of those experiments didn't work, and some
yeah,
of them are like, now that like a gold standard for
yeah.
how we think about the building blocks of DeFi.
And so you think now to date, we're kinda in this watered down version of everyone's just trying to monetize these things, or do you see a chance for creativity be infused back into it, or do you think that's still happening at a healthy clip?
I think it's still happening. I just think it's really rare. I mean, even just pitching, Amalgam, a lot of people, a lot of times told me like, we're just so sick of hearing another, and not to pick on NFTs, but like NFT pitch or some, even our
Take
auditors, they're
on
like,
NFTs.
we don't want to audit another like fork of name it, right? Like
Yeah,
for the fifth time, right? And so I think that it's still happening. I think it's not as common. It's not as, but I think some of the people that were really successful in early DeFi are still innovating and they're still being creative. Um,
what do you think changed?
well, I think right now there's just so much hype and there's so much noise, and a lot of it I think is um, I think there's a lot of lost direction, like
Ooh,
missing me, where people are like, "Oh, I'm gonna get into this to like, you know, retire early," which is great. Like if you could do it, but it's like a lot of it's snake oil, right? It's not real. It's
right.
selling this, uh, this pipe dream, and I think that has sort of taken away from I think those early innovative, like the spirit of innovation that was early in what I saw in DeFi.
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't think it's still not there. I just think that it doesn't get as much attention.
Yeah, and so I love your reaction to this. I think the problem is the industry has made amazing leaps and bounds when it comes from technology over, let's say, the last 4 years as a whole, whether you say, DeFi or new L1s or the advent of L2s and people trying to figure it out, NFTs, even they have evolved. Take all of it, right? I think, and I've had this with a lot of discussions, is it's still mainly financially driven. And so the incentive is to make a ton of money. And there's not much incentive around being creative or making products that are solving real world problems. Like there are, but what I'm saying is the incentive is not based around that. The incentive is still just pure monetary.
Right.
And it's been exponentially made worse by the fact that KOLs who don't have really many deep knowledge of any of this stuff are monetarily being rewarded by seeing how much hypes they can build around shit tokens, right? Like they're trying to convince us that a meme coin is a cultural thing and that this is the new future of money. It's like, guys, this is just gambling. Like, come on now here, people. Do you agree with that sentiment or do you have a different take?
No, I think I agree with that.
Yeah. And I think I don't know how to solve it. Like, how do you start evolving it? What do you do? And I think my intuition would say people like you that are trying to actually build products and cut through the noise like that. And that's what, and I'd be interested on your thoughts right here. I've actually seen this over the last, I'd say, really 3 to 4 months. My brand was never fit for Web3 because my brand is about this. It's about getting to the heart and the humans who are building within the space. But guess what? That doesn't make a ton of people money, and that content is not selling hype. So my brand, well, although I'm at top tier when it comes to authenticity and genuinity, which I will live by as wealth in my own mind, it's not going to get me 100,000 followers, but the quality that I have and the opportunities over the last 3 to 4 months that it has created and the more eyeballs that I'm getting is because people are starting to get burnt out by the same bullshit narrative in this space. What are your thoughts there from a entrepreneur product perspective?
Yeah, I don't know what I was listening to, but what it makes me think of is this probably something with politics and like messaging. And I think that fear and sort of the base instincts, like, and I think money can tap into those instincts, are easy, like emotional strings to pull on people, and they, so like, and the more aspirational, I think, are actually more powerful, but they're harder to tap into, right?
Yeah.
It's like when you tap into them, they go much further.
Yeah.
But before you get to that point of like, the easiest way to like hijack the human psyche is, fear, money, fear, greed, all those things are much easier to hijack your sensory system. That being said, I think that the long game is, water seeks its own level is something that I,
Ooh, I like
subscribe
that.
to, where like, yes, maybe you're not, the biggest KOL in the space, but like those things I think start to matter less. And that when you just do and stay true to your values, those become so much more attractive to the people around you.
100%.
And that attractiveness isn't short term, right? Because eventually that like fear, greed, like sensory, like wears off, right?
Yeah.
It's not sustainable.
Nope.
Whereas, people that are driven to or leading by example with, integrity and, creativity and trying to be different and trying to, innovate. Like all those things I think are, harder to get, 100,000 like, manic followers,
Yeah.
but the people that you bring with you are much, they're there for the long term,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yeah, man, it's always this concept of quality over quantity, and I will always go for quality over quantity for sure. And it is. It's back to what we said, This is why we have these conversations. All this shit comes full circle, and it's the same principle. Like that's the other thing about Web3 and crypto and all these things. People try to make it sound complex, but the same universal principles apply here, right?
Right.
Like this industry exists because you've had this cycle of people saying that you can become a millionaire overnight. Billions of dollars every year are spent on somehow some new marketing campaign convincing somebody that they can lose 100 pounds in a month. Guess what, people? That's not how the human body works. But yet we still spend billions of dollars convincing ourselves otherwise. Web3 is no different. It's just a lottery ticket instead, and we're convincing ourselves otherwise. So yes, man, it's such a fascinating conversation. And meanwhile, people that are doing it right, like yourself, are building novel new products that are getting capital, millions of dollars in raise. And people like myself, I've built a full-fledged business that makes revenue with 1/100th of the followers of these people because I offer tangible value, right? And that's what it boils down to is the end of the day, offering value. So let's perfect segue into this. Tell me about Ammalgam, 2 minutes or less. Basically the elevator pitch. What are you doing currently, and what? I was going to twofold: elevator pitch, and why are you super jazzed up about what you're doing?
Sure. The elevator pitch is we're putting a DEX and a lending protocol together into one primitive so that they do both things at the same time, right? It is both things to on one hand actually create permissionless lending, which is something that is still gate kept by whitelists and requires oracles. So we're trying to push the boundaries on how far lending can go in DeFi without those requirements.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the second piece of it is that for market makers, the entire setup is that while you're market making, the assets that typically don't get used are lent out. And so market makers earn lending fees and swap fees at the same time. And our models on some of the majors show a 60% increase in capital efficiency over our competitors.
And is that because of efficiencies in the process?
It's because you can earn the swap fees the same way as older mechanisms, right? And so it's this one-to-one there, but then also earn lending fees. There's this tweet that we put in our raise material from Hayden where he describes Uniswap V3 as like, hey, if you're going from V2 to V3, you should take 1% of your assets that were in V2 and put it in V3. And you should take 999% of the rest of them and put them in like Aave or Compound, right? And so that's interesting, I guess, if you want to like, do like 3 different approvals and, make 5 transactions and like manage the ranges and all that different stuff that you have to do.
Right.
In our situation, that's just sort of done all for you.
Right.
So you have that sort of automated like system where it's lending out the assets that aren't being used. It's still supporting swaps, and you're double dipping on the fees.
And it's all wrapped into one account, I'm assuming, like your one wallet or custodial, whatever you have attached to your platform, right?
Exactly. It's one wallet. It's one contract that you're interacting with, rather than, multiple protocols, multiple UIs, right? All of it is wrapped up into one in a really convenient way.
And so this just seems like very simple and practical, right? But why? I'm assuming people don't build this because, one, they think it's too much work for a little return, or it's just too much work. Like, why did it take till you to say, hey, I'm going to solve this problem?
Yeah, I mean, lending is really hard. Most of the larger hacks that have happened are to lending protocols. And
Mm,
so even with oracles and even with whitelists, like we've seen these models not work
yeah,
or spiral out of control, or someone able to extract money that they shouldn't be able to extract. And so
right.
it's not an easy problem, and it ended up having a really simple elevator pitch that I just gave you. Simple ideas, why don't we just put these together, like that, duh. But the problem is that there's a ton of complexity to do this right. And
Gotcha.
so I think that the process of figuring out a strategy to do this has been a long journey.
Yeah.
And even once we had the strategy, it was, oh, this is how we're going to do it. And then it was like, okay, now we have to write it in code and do it in Solidity, which is a really hard language to work with.
Yeah.
And, do it within the constraints of like, this. And so, there are a lot of engineering, feats to overcome and challenges to overcome to
Yeah.
get to where we are today.
I love it, man. And through that journey, I'm interested for people that understand, because we don't have time to like go into because I think you have a huge opportunity for education too. I think a lot of people like yourself do amazing work. And that's where I come in, right? Like we can build practical content together, because I think it intimidates the normie or a majority of the population that lives in this ecosystem, right? And I'm not
Sure.
gonna act like I'm an expert either. I get a lot of the stuff from the high level, but if you were like, "Mikey, you need to go hardcore down any of these funnels," I would be intimidated myself as well. So I think there's huge opportunity there too, but I am interested for you to help educate people that are trying to figure out these super complex problems. Top 2 skill sets that you think you've utilized as you've gone down this crazy road.
Well, I think that like having an idea and is one thing, and I think that's the amount of diligence it requires to take an idea to its complete product is insane. And so
Yeah.
it's like I think that's sometimes what I like, if people pitch me something, I'm just like, oh, okay, cool. Like if you want to go put 2 or 3 years into that, like that's great. But is that what you want to go all in on?
Yeah.
Because you just have to go all in on something. And I think the other aspect of that is like you have to be able to be told no a lot and not take it personal, right? And
Mhm.
not let it like bring you down.
Yep.
And it naturally does, right? We're
Yeah.
human beings. And so when
Yeah.
people tell us like that, whatever the feedback is over and over again, like you can't, you almost have to be, uh, you know, over the top hyped on your project, even if part of you knows like this is an experiment, it might not work,
It might be
right?
horrible.
Like
Right.
this may not, whatever. Like you have all these real human fears, and you sort of have to like be able to like decouple the rational side of you and then just go into this like, you know, bullish, like no one can tell me any different. Because if you can't get into that moment, into that mode, like you will get told no enough times and eventually you'll start believing what people are telling you.
Yeah.
And there are times where they're right, right? There are situations where your idea sucks, right?
Yeah.
And so there's like this mix of being bullish and like not letting people tear you down, and also this like practical, like, am I like saying the sky is purple and like everyone thinks I'm an idiot,
Right.
or like is this real? And so that balancing act is I
So
think a
tough.
huge part of being able to like have the endurance
Mhm.
to like keep going.
Yep.
And there's been moments in my journey where I was like, I'm extremely bullish about this, but I don't know if this is going to be a thing in 3 months.
Mhm.
And I had to get to this point where I just was like, I don't care. I'm just going to keep building this until like, everyone around me tells me that I've like lost my sanity and I have to
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah. And I think you touched on two very interesting things that always also come up too. Is one of the things is it sounds weird because it's so contradicting, which is you need to be bullish, but you also need to know when to call it quits because at sometimes you just start turning insane. I don't think there's no silver bullet for that. That's just experience, trial and error. And again, sometimes timing and luck, right?
Right.
But the two that I think is something you can work on, and this is only, I think, from experience, and especially in the business kind of founder perspective, is I think this is one of my other superpowers, and it's by far so I have two co-founders, one that started the podcast and another one we'll chat after the podcast, like a strategy guy that we've been in this space for a while, and we do a lot of like product stuff. Being insanely empathetic with people and understanding them, but then being devoid of emotion when a practical business decision needs to be made.
Yeah.
That is so hard, right? Because I deeply care about people, and the thing I've struggled with the most in my life and career is it's so hard to make that tough decision. But if you take a step back and look at it objectively without emotion, it's usually pretty clear the decision you need to make, you know?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I have had those situations with people, and I think that it can be extremely hard to like have both empathy for people and also know that like you have to run a business, and sometimes that means, you know, making hard decisions that affect other people.
Yeah. And I think you can do that with compassion, even though you're making the hard decisions, which is humans are humans, man. And if you can relate to say, I know this is going to suck, but here's X, Y, and Z, and be practical about it.
Right.
At some point, if the person doesn't see the other point of view, it's almost like a lost cause, right?
Right.
But dude, beautiful, beautiful insight. I gotta go get my little one up here soon. We've been talking for almost an hour and a half. I told you this is going to be magical. I feel like it's magical. What we're going to do here is I'm going to give you a chance to give me anything else about Ammalgam. I know we didn't talk about it a ton, but we talked about really important things. In next 3 to 6 months, we'll obviously bring you back on the podcast. We can get more technical. I'm going to help you spread the love of what Ammalgam is doing in the future. Any highlights of anything else you want to touch on next 3 to 6 months? I'll ask you one last question, total softball, and then we'll shut it down with my final comments.
Yeah, I mean, we're wrapping up our audits. We're in the middle of audits right now, trying to wrap up in March, and we're getting ready to launch this thing. So I just think people should really be paying attention and start looking at what we're doing. And we're gonna do a better job in the next few weeks of putting out more material for people to understand what we've done and try to get a lot louder in the space.
How about for, you know, part of my audience that is just excited about Web3 and the things that are happening, maybe a little heavier into the meme coining side of things and the NFT side of things? Why should they be excited about this?
Limitless leverage. So we can create limitless leverage for whatever token they want to trade with our protocol in a really interesting way. So
limitless leverage. We're going to leave it at that. I think it's that simple. And so wrapping up, I always ask one question to every guest, and it's very simple. Will, you have now been to the Mikey G podcast experience. You probably either been on another podcast, maybe this is your first, but you've definitely listened to thousands of spaces or been on spaces yourself. Raw, unfiltered feedback for me on your last hour and a half with me.
This has been really great. I think that you've have a knack for this.
Thanks.
It was a fun conversation. I hope somebody out there found something valuable from it. I'm not really paying attention to that aspect of this. I've really just been, you know, able to sit here and have a conversation with you. So you know, besides a little bit of a scare with a Twitter account that we had to move everything around that didn't end up being a thing, I think you've you know, just done everything.
Thanks, man.
I'm really appreciative for you giving me the spot and the you know, the time and doing your thing.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And yeah, dude, the Twitter breach was not ideal timing. But we have hundreds of people watching, man. And I'll tell you this. Everyone was loving you. Multiple comments about how you're a gigabrain yourself. There is one question that I will ask before I close it up is, when are you launching your own meme coin? I'm assuming it's probably not going to happen, but somebody wants it out there.
Okay.
They all thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. A lot of nice things have been chatted. So you did an amazing job. And like I told you, you have for sure impacted a human life at the end of this. And if we can just walk away with saying, I changed one person's mind, I think we did a pretty damn good job of making the world a little bit better, you know?
Yeah, I would 100% agree.
So my final thoughts for you, man. I can tell you're brilliant. I am so grateful that you came on because there's not many people that get as raw as you have. And they were really important messages. Like, listen, I know we didn't talk about Web3 the whole time. And like I said, we'll have plenty of chances to collaborate on content, but we're going to have so many shorts that come out of this that are going to impact people's lives. And that what you've done is something magical, which is you are the person that built this company. So there's no way that ethos can't trickle down through your company as well too. So people that believe in you as a human, that's the most magical thing we do here is all they need to do is believe in you. And now they're falling into line to like Ammalgam, hell yes. And if I don't know anything about what he's building, I'm going to start learning about that. And I already got chats in my community too. Like, how can I learn more? How can I get involved? They're excited. And that's what you did today. And it was just really cool to see. So congrats. And that only happens if you open up, and you did. I feel like we did accomplish the goal of the friendship. I literally really mean this is the beginning of a friendship. We'll set up a half-hour strategy call after this. We'll talk more kind of business strategy, but we'll also review the content that we talked about and maybe even some more content that we can pop up. But at the end of the day, I just get the vibe that you're a good human being. You've gone through so much. You've applied what you've learned. You're applying it to your business. And I really loved our conversation that kind of traveled throughout the whole thing, which is this juxtaposition of creativity and mathematics, which people usually don't talk about together. Yeah. And I think that's a really important topic. And I also think there's something there for future content as well. And then finally, I say this to a majority of the guests, but bro, you're about to launch a massive thing and you just gave me an hour and a half of your time. That is worth a lot of money. So I really, really appreciate that. And it's not lost on me at all. So thank you so much, man.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. So,
and with that being said, Mikey G, midlife crisis now, mid_life crisis. I will still be tweeting. I will still be around until I get my damn Twitter account back. Sorry, Elon, you got a real shit product when it comes to getting hacked and trying to get your account back. But I will pay attention to the Twitter. We will have short form content from here. We've got the podcast next week, all for the Midlife Crisis account. We love you all, and we are out.
Take care.